This video looks at the War of 1812, more specifically the fall of 1813, where we see the British Army vacate Amherstburg, Sandwich, and Detroit to retreat up the Thames River in Upper Canada. The American pursuit will culminate in what has been known as the Battle of the Thames, or the Battle of Moraviantown. Through this series of events and actions, we will see a future President of the United States, a future Vice President, the ruination of a long-standing military career, and the death of a famous Shawnee leader and warrior.
Hi, I'm Tom Fournier from the Crown Forces staff. Also, I used to command the 41st Regiment of Foot Military Reenacting Group. So you're going to find this perspective is going to have a decided British look to it. I've drawn heavily upon the court-martial transcripts for Major General Henry Proctor. Behind me, you'll see the Thames River, or as the French called it, the Rivière Tranche, literally the trench. So this is a big topic covering nearly 2 weeks in time, lots of big names and personalities. The retreat covered 90 miles in distance, and we got a whole lot to fit into a very small segment. I'm sure there's going to be parts we overlook or skim over, but please bear with me. We'll do the best we can.
The British Army under the command of Major General Henry Proctor were in 3 garrisons, Amherstburg, Sandwich, and Detroit. They also had a considerable number of indigenous warriors and their families to support and feed. They had no money. Soldiers were 6 months in arrears in their pay. This was literally the end of the road. With limited roads, often in very poor condition, control of the lake and access to shipping was vital to support and sustain their position. With the Battle of Lake Erie on September 10, 1813, it meant a difficult situation had become untenable. Not only was there the loss of the fleet, but also a loss of a considerable number of soldiers of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and the 41st Regiment who were pressed into action on the badly undermanned fleet. Proctor felt he had to make a retreat. He had planned to retreat to the Thames River, hoping to preserve the alliance with the indigenous warriors and their families. The retreat did not begin until September 22nd, nearly 2 weeks later. The initial plans were to ready the area around Dolsons just before Chatham for a stand, while defenses were being prepared at the forks of the Thames in Chatham. September 27th, William Henry Harrison and the American forces landed near Amherstburg and marched into town unopposed. At the same time, a large mounted contingent was also moving along the opposite shore towards Detroit. On the retreat, a debate arose as to whether to make a stand at the Forks or at Dolsons. Dolsons was chosen with the idea that ground could be used to throw up a battery and loopholes could be cut into the wooden buildings. But the tools could not be found. They were upriver somewhere in the boats. Tecumseh pressed for a retreat to the fork of the Thames, where he was led to believe that there would be fortifications. Upon arrival at the Forks, it was found that no fortifications had been established. Tecumseh was extremely upset. Preparations were made for a stand to be made at the Forks, but after a council with his chiefs, Tecumseh said he would like to retreat to Moraviantown. With the Americans now in close pursuit, the retreat continued, with boats being scuttled to block the river, boats and stores being abandoned or destroyed, and stragglers being captured by the Americans. By October 4th, the soldiers had no bread, and if meat was available, it was raw with no means to cook it.
We are at the site where Moraviantown stood. As the retreat was being mismanaged and chaos ensued, it became apparent that Moraviantown is where the British Army was going to make a stand. The initial plan was to cut loopholes in the buildings like this. This ravine stood at the end of the Longwoods Road as it cut through Moraviantown. The plan was, and actually they did have the British guns sighted at the top end of the ravine. So the idea was soldiers would defend the huts and have a fighting withdrawal back through the ravine where the Americans would face the battery of guns. Why this never occurred is impossible to tell. We stand here on the battlefield. This is the ground chosen by the British to stand and fight. The British line would be anchored on its left by the river. To its right was a swamp where the indigenous warriors were situated. With the march to Moravian Town, the halt and countermarch back to this ground, the formations were hopelessly jumbled. The grenadiers in light company, normally on the flanks of the line, were in the center. There are reports that the rear rank stood in front of the front rank. Tired, hungry, confused, short of ammunition, and reportedly considerably outnumbered, the British soldiers stood and waited for an attack that was imminent. Only the attack was not coming. They stood in position for 2 or 3 hours awaiting the Americans. No attempt was made to create defensive works like felling trees in front of their positions. Likely the tools were unknown as to their location. A distant bugle sounded. Then the bugle sounded again, even closer. The Americans attacked with mounted riflemen. They targeted the right of the British line, hitting it with heavy fire and charging their horses through the gaps. Soon there were riflemen between the two lines, rounding up survivors of the first lines. Other soldiers were running desperately back to and through the second line. The riflemen hit the second line. It fired, but very quickly fell apart. 18 men were killed, 22 were wounded. In mere moments, the battle was over. Cavalry and mounted staff, including Henry Proctor, fled away on horseback. So now the Americans can turn their attention to Tecumseh and the indigenous warriors. It's really confusing. There's a lot of mixed accounts just how many were there. Quite a few melted away during the course of the retreat. There were also a significant number back in Moravian Town, seeing to the safety and security of their families. The best estimates were maybe 500 warriors stood against the Americans. The Americans organized a forlorn hope. That is, a small group of men who were going to rush the Indians, soak up their fire, and before they could reload, then the main attack would happen. The forlorn hope occurred, the attack ensued, and then reportedly Richard Mentor Johnson, a future vice president of the United States, killed Tecumseh. With the death of Tecumseh, the indigenous forces melted away. It was a dramatic American victory under William Henry Harrison, a future president of the United States. With the victory, effectively the pursuit of the British had ended. The Americans had over 600 British captives, those from the battle, those captured along the route of the retreat, and then stragglers that continued to come in at the end of the battle. With the battle, Tecumseh died along with his dreams of an indigenous confederacy. Henry Proctor would see his military career in ruins. He would face a court-martial and was found guilty of a want of energy and judgment. He was suspended 6 months without pay, but this effectively ended his military career.